There are words in this world older than history itself, whispered in forgotten temples, carved into crumbling stone, hidden in the shadows of myths so ancient they've slipped from memory. But just because something is forgotten doesn't mean it's gone. Some forces sleep lightly, and the wrong phrase, spoken at the wrong time, can stir them. Legends speak of 7 words, forbidden not because they're mere curses, but because they're keys. Utter one, and you might awaken something that should have stayed buried. Picture this, a crumbling ruin deep in the jungle, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something older. The walls are covered in symbols no living person can read, but if you traced your fingers along them, you'd feel a hum, a vibration like the stone itself is holding its breath. That's the power we're talking about. These 7 words aren't just sounds, they're echoes of a time when language wasn't just for communication. It was a weapon, a bridge, a way to call things into being. And somewhere in the dark corners of the world, they're still waiting. This isn't just a story, it's a warning, because while most of us go about our lives never giving a second thought to the words we speak, there are those who have spent lifetimes searching for these phrases, chasing the kind of power that twists fate itself. And what happens if they find them? That's what we're about to uncover. From the lost libraries of Alexandria to the whispered rituals of secret societies, the trail of these words is woven into the fabric of history, and it's far from over. So lean in close and listen carefully, because by the end of this you'll understand why some words were never meant to be spoken again. The first forbidden word traces its roots to the cradle of civilization itself, ancient Sumer, where language was more than a tool for kings and merchants. It was a force as tangible as fire or flood. Linguists and occult scholars call it a daru, though that's merely the closest approximation we dare speak aloud. The original pronunciation, lost to time, though some claim it lingers in the wind between the ruins of Ur. According to cuneiform tablets buried beneath the desert for millennia, a daru was never meant for human tongues. It belonged to the gods, a sound so potent it could summon storms or split the earth. One clay fragment tells of a priest-king who spoke it to end a drought, only for the Euphrates to swell into a flood that swallowed 3 cities. Another describes a warrior who whispered it in battle, and the very sky darkened with winged creatures, their shrieks driving his army mad. But the most chilling account comes from an Egyptian scroll smuggled out of Alexandria before its burning. It claims a daru wasn't just a word, it was a name, the true name of a being so ancient, even the Sumerians only referred to it as the one who slumbers. Uttering it was like knocking on a door, and something always answered. A 13th century alchemist's diary recounts how a group of scholars in Baghdad tried to reconstruct the word from fragments. That very night, every mirror in the city shattered, and witnesses swore they saw shadows moving against the wind. By dawn, the scholars were gone. Only their notes remained, the final page smeared with ink as if written in frantic haste. It hears. It always hears, so why would anyone risk speaking such a word? Power, of course, the kind that bends reality. But history suggests a pattern. Those who seek a daru rarely survive its gift. Because some doors, once opened, won't close again. The rituals surrounding a daru weren't just ceremonies, they were desperate attempts to cage a storm. The Sumerians believed the word's power could be contained, but only if shackled by precise rites. Clay tablets from Nineveh describe a ritual performed once every 52 years, where high priests would seal the word inside a clay cylinder, surrounded by 7 layers of curses in different languages. The cylinder was then submerged in sacred oil and buried beneath the temple floor, guarded by blind priests who'd had their tongues removed. Why blind? Because the texts warn that even reading a daru could invite its attention. Archaeologists in modern-day Iraq stumbled upon one of these cylinders in the 1980s, perfectly preserved until it wasn't. The team reported hearing whispers in a language none of them recognized. though one linguist later claimed it matched a dialect extinct for 4,000 years. By morning, the cylinder had cracked open, empty, as if something inside had left. The lead researcher's journal from that expedition was later found with a single line scrawled across the final page: "It doesn't stay buried." But the Sumerians weren't the only ones who feared a Daru. In the ruins of Carthage, archaeologists found lead scrolls inscribed with spiraling symbols meant to tangle the word's power, like trapping a viper in a knot. The scrolls were always buried face down, a practice echoed in medieval Europe where grimoires warned never to write the word upright. One 15th century mystic even claimed ink containing a Daru would bleed through parchment, no matter how many layers were used. Perhaps most chilling are the artifacts meant not to contain the word but to warn against it. In a hidden chamber beneath a Mayan pyramid, researchers discovered a jade mask with a Daru carved into its forehead backwards. The accompanying glyphs describe it as a mirror for the nameless, suggesting the word could be turned against itself. But here's the catch: every explorer who studied the mask has vanished within a year of touching it. Coincidence, maybe, but when it comes to a Daru, history suggests there are no coincidences, only consequences. Even now, fragments of these rituals linger. In remote monasteries, certain manuscripts are still chained shut with silver locks, and there's a reason linguists avoid reconstructing dead languages near archaeological sites. Because some words aren't just forbidden, they're hungry, and the oldest ones have waited this long. They can wait a little longer. The warnings of the ancients didn't fade with their civilizations. A Daru still leaves its mark in our modern world, often where you'd least expect it. Take the case of Professor Elias Varga, a linguist specializing in dead languages. In 2011, while translating a newly discovered Sumerian tablet in Berlin, he claimed to have uncovered the phonetic skeleton of a Daru. His colleagues dismissed it as academic enthusiasm until the night his apartment building shook with what seismographs registered as a localized tremor centered entirely on his study. When security arrived, Varga was gone. His desk lamp still glowed, his notes lay open, but the page containing his reconstruction of the word had been torn out, edges charred as if burned from within the paper. The only clue, a single line scribbled in the margin. It spoke back. Then there's the infamous black tapes from a paranormal research group in Chile. In 2017, their audio equipment picked up a voice repeating a guttural phrase during an investigation at a pre-Incan ruin. The speaker, later identified as a local guide, vanished that same night. When linguists analyzed the recording, they noted the phrase shared a Daru's root structure. The researchers sealed the tapes in a lead-lined box, but within weeks, every member of the team reported nightmares of a figure made of shifting consonants. The tapes themselves, they turn to static except for 3 seconds of looping audio that plays at random, always at 3 a.m. on any device that's touched them. Even artifacts linked to the word carry a curse. A private collector in Tokyo once acquired a Sumerian cylinder seal supposedly used to stamp a Daru onto clay tablets. Within months, his staff quit, describing hallucinations of ink pooling in the corners of their vision. The collector refused to part with the seal until his penthouse was found empty one morning, the seal's impression freshly pressed into his pillow as if something had lain beside him. The seal itself was missing, but infrared photos later revealed its design burned into the wall behind where it had been displayed. Perhaps most chilling are the digital echoes. In 2019, a Reddit thread titled "Found a Word That Shouldn't Exist" went viral before being scrubbed. The user claimed to have decoded a Daru from a Mesopotamian game board's inscriptions. Their final post, a garbled audio file that crashed browsers and left listeners with migraines and temporary hearing loss. Forensic archivists managed to salvage fragments. The audio's waveform doesn't match any human language. Instead, it spirals inward like a fractal or a summoning circle. These aren't campfire tales, they're patterns. From scholars to thrill seekers, those who brush against a Daru share eerie overlaps, vanishing without trace, objects that refuse to stay contained, and a recurring motif of something listening. Because the truth is, forbidden words don't lose their power, they just wait for the right mouth to shape them again. And in a world where forgotten texts surface in dusty archives and algorithms reconstruct dead tongues, the line between curiosity and catastrophe grows thinner by the day. If a Daru was the key to waking what slumbers beneath the earth, then the second forbidden word, Vazakaru, is said to be the knife that cuts the veil between worlds. Unlike a Daru, which belongs to the whispers of Sumer, Vazakaru emerges from two civilizations separated by time and distance, Babylon and the frozen reaches of the Norse lands, yet both tell the same terrifying story. The Babylonians etched warnings about Vazakaru into clay tablets now housed in the British Museum, though few realize what they truly hold. Translated as the opener of paths, it was used in rituals to summon the god Marduk during the darkest eclipses. But the texts caution that speaking it without the proper rites risked summoning more than just a deity. One fragment describes a priestess who chanted Vazakaru to commune with the dead, only for the temple's shadows to twist into figures with too many joints, their whispers promising a crown of stars if she'd only say the word again. She was found days later, her body untouched, but her eyes had turned black as polished obsidian. The tablet ends abruptly, as if the scribe feared finishing the tale. Meanwhile, in Norse sagas, Vazakaru appears under a different name, Vafthrith, Nismal, a word so potent it was only written in runes carved backward into standing stones. According to the Galdrabok, a medieval Icelandic grimoire, uttering it could force the gates of Helheim to open, but never to close fully. A passage tells of a Viking skald who used it to demand wisdom from Odin. The god answered, but so did something else. The skald's final poem describes a door without a keyhole forming in the air behind Odin, and a hand woven from smoke and old blood reaching through. The skald vanished that night, leaving only his spear driven deep into the earth as if to pin something down. What ties these two cultures together is the recurring motif of thresholds. Vazakaru doesn't just summon, it unmakes the boundary between here and elsewhere. A 9th century Arabic manuscript recovered from a Baghdad dig describes Babylonian sorcerers using the word to create mirror gates, portals that reflected not the viewer but whatever lurked just beyond sight. One account tells of a caliph's executioner who mocked a condemned sorcerer by demanding he show proof of his magic. The sorcerer spoke a single syllable, likely a fragment of Vazakaru, and the executioner's shadow stopped moving with him. By sunset, the shadow had grown teeth. Modern encounters follow the same eerie pattern. In 2016, a team restoring a Norse longhouse in Norway uncovered a runestone bearing Vazakaru's inverted runes. The project lead, Dr. Ingrid Sorensen, reported hearing a sound like ice cracking underfoot whenever she worked near it. Then the nightmares started, a figure offering her a name that would fit inside her bones. When workers accidentally broke the stone during removal, 7 of them developed identical circular burns on their palms, as if they'd grasped something that burned cold. The lesson: some words aren't just forbidden because of what they summon, but because of what they undo. A threshold once opened can't always be closed. And the things waiting on the other side, they've been listening for a very, very long time. The being summoned by Vazakaru wears many faces across cultures, but one thread binds them all, something ancient, hungry, and not meant to walk this side of the threshold. In Babylonian texts, it's called Tiamat's shadow, a fragment of the primordial chaos that even the gods feared. Descriptions paint it as a shifting mass of darkness with veins of starlight, its form flickering between serpent, storm, and something too many-limbed to count. Tablets warn that it doesn't speak. It echoes, repeating the last words it heard in a voice that unravels the mind like old thread, its power to twist paths. Offer it a name and it will show you the way to that person's soul for a price. One incantation text describes a king who begged it to reveal an enemy's weakness. It obliged, but the next morning every mirror in his palace reflected not his face but the enemy's smiling. The Norse knew it as Janari, the gap stalker. Unlike the Babylonian version, this entity had a grotesquely physical form, a giant clad in a cloak of frozen breath, its eyes sealed shut with silver nails. The Galdrabok claims these nails were a ward because when Janari opens its eyes, it doesn't see, it unties. Sagas tell of villages vanishing overnight after someone whispered Vazakaru near a burial mound, leaving only frost-etched footprints circling empty homes. The most chilling account comes from a skald's verse found carved inside a cave. It comes not with tooth or claw, but with the space between words. Where it walks, the world forgets itself. Yet both cultures agree on one horror. This being doesn't just cross thresholds, it becomes them. A 13th century Arabic grimoire describes Babylonian sorcerers drawing Vazakaru in the air with a blade, creating a door only they could see. But the text cautions that every such door remains invisible and waiting, hungry for hands to push it open again. Norse lore is eerily similar. After Janari's visits, survivors reported air that stuck to the skin like wet wool, and the uncanny sense that every doorway they passed had something breathing just beyond the hinge. Modern encounters suggest these entities never left. In 2018, a construction crew in Bergen unearthed a Viking-era amulet engraved with Vazakaru's runes. Security footage from that night shows a fog pooling against the wind, coiling around the site in patterns that matched the amulet's design. Workers later described nightmares of a man made of doorways, each one opening onto a different version of their own face, older, younger, or worse, not quite human anymore. The amulet disappeared, but 9 months later, a child playing near the site drew a picture of a tall man with no eyes and wrote beneath it, "He's still building." Perhaps most disturbing is how these entities evolve. A Babylonian exorcism text warns that each time Tiamat's shadow is summoned, it learns adapting to new languages, new fears. A Norse shield found in a Danish bog bears a scrap of parchment tied to its grip. Do not speak of it in the present tense, it listens better that way. And that's the true danger of Vazakaru. It doesn't just call something forth, it teaches that thing how to stay. The warnings left by ancient priests weren't just whispers, they were carved into stone, etched onto lead, and hidden in places meant to deter the curious. Take the Kirk monolith, a 9th century BCE Assyrian artifact now housed in the British Museum. On its surface, among boasts of military victories, there's a peculiar passage describing a word that unseals the sky. Scholars long dismissed it as poetic hyperbole, until infrared imaging revealed faint scratches beneath the text, as if someone had frantically attempted to erase something. The hidden glyphs match a known Babylonian warning about Vazakaru and the erased portion, a crude drawing of a door with something pushing through from the other side. Then there's the Shorapak box, a terracotta container unearthed in modern-day Iraq. Sealed with bitumen and marked with a cuneiform curse, it contained 7 clay tablets, 6 detailing funeral rites, and a 7th placed upside down, bearing Vazakaru in jagged, hurried strokes. The tablet's edges were scorched, and microscopic analysis showed traces of a substance matching ancient Mesopotamian ghost glue, a resin used to bind malicious spirits to objects. Most chilling, the box was found buried beneath a temple's foundation, surrounded by the skeletons of 3 priests, each with their hands clamped over their own ears. But it's not just the Middle East where these warnings appear. In 2014, a hiker in Norway's Romsdal Mountains stumbled upon a previously unknown Viking bortestein, a standing stone engraved with runes. At first glance, it commemorated a fallen warrior, but when sunlight hit the stone at a specific angle, shadow runes emerged along its edge. Speak not the opener's name where echoes linger, lest the door answer. Local folklore claims the area is riddled with silent caves, hollows where sound doesn't carry except when it does, returning hours or even days later, distorted. In 2019, a team from the University of Oslo tried to document the phenomenon. Their audio recorders picked up something unexpected, a whisper in Old Norse repeating Vasakaru, though no one on the team had spoken it. The recording timestamp showed the voice appeared exactly 24 hours after they'd first entered the cave. Perhaps the most disturbing modern discovery comes from a dig near the ancient city of Harran. In 2022, archaeologists uncovered a shrine dedicated to the Keeper of Thresholds. Its walls were lined with hundreds of tiny clay tablets, each inscribed with a name, likely offerings to placate whatever Vasakaru could summon. But the centerpiece was an obsidian slab, its surface polished to a mirror finish. Engraved along its rim was Vasakaru written in reverse, and beneath it a warning in Aramaic. Look not into the glass after speaking, lest you see what looks back. When researchers used 3D imaging to study the slab's underside, they found hairline fractures forming a perfect spiral, as if something had pressed against the stone from inside. These artifacts share a common thread: desperation. The inverted tablets, the erased glyphs, the buried boxes, each screams a plea across centuries. Don't say this. Don't write this, don't even think this, because while civilizations rise and fall, some doors once unlocked stay that way, and the things on the other side. They're patient, they'll wait for the next curious soul to whisper their name. The third forbidden word carries the weight of crumbling temples and skies torn open. Utherlan, a whisper that shook the pillars of the ancient world. Unlike Adaru's summoning or Vasakaru's threshold breaking, Utherlan was feared as the breaker of foundations, a word so tied to the earth's rage that both Greek and Celtic lore warn it must never be spoken near stone. In the ruins of Delphi, archaeologists found a lead scroll buried beneath the Temple of Apollo, its edges fused as if exposed to immense heat. The text, written in a dialect older than classical Greek, describes Utherlan as the true name of the Titan who holds up the world. According to the scroll, when the Titans were imprisoned beneath the earth, their fury became the molten core of mountains, and Utherlan was the key to waking that fury. One passage recounts how a priestess, driven mad by prophecy, screamed it during a sacred rite. That night, an earthquake split the temple's altar in two, and locals reported seeing figures of flame crawling from the fissure. By dawn, the priestess was gone, but her sandals remained, filled with black ash that blew away in the wind, no matter how tightly they were sealed. Celtic legends echo this horror. The Libhar na Uada, an Irish manuscript from the 12th century, tells of the druidess Phelan, who used Utherlan to cast down a rival clan's fort. She chanted it while pressing her palms to the earth, and by midnight the fort's walls sank into the ground as if swallowed. But the text warns that the land itself rebelled. The druidess's own village was swallowed by a bog the next winter, and travelers claimed to hear muffled screams beneath the peat. The manuscript's margin bears a crude sketch of a mouth with roots growing through its teeth, captioned, "The earth remembers every word." Roman historians added a darker twist. Pliny the Younger wrote of a condemned sorcerer in Pompeii who, rather than face execution, scratched Utherlan into his cell wall. That night, a tremor toppled 2 watchtowers, and the sorcerer's cell was found empty, the etching now glowing faintly, like embers seen through smoke. Days later, Vesuvius buried the city. Coincidence, maybe, but scrolls recovered from Herculaneum's ashes contain warnings about words that stir the sleeping fire, and one fragmented text explicitly links Utherlan to the breath of the mountain. Modern encounters follow the same eerie script. In 2013, a team surveying seismic activity near Mount Etna recorded a bizarre audio anomaly, a deep, rhythmic pulse matching no known geological frequency. When played backward, the waveform resembled a phonetic reconstruction of Utherlan. That same week, Etna's crater erupted with unprecedented violence, spewing ash that coated a nearby dig site where researchers had just uncovered a Roman-era lead tablet. The tablet's inscription, a single line, "Do not wake what the earth has put to sleep." Then there's the infamous Berlin incident of 2006. A linguist attempting to reconstruct Otherland from Mycenaean clay tablets reported a strange phenomenon. Every recording device in her lab malfunctioned when she spoke the word aloud, while plants in the room wilted overnight. Her final journal entry, dated the day before her disappearance, reads, "It's not just a word, it's a vibration. The stones here hum it back." Perhaps most chilling is how Otherland lingers in places touched by disaster. Survivors of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami described hearing a low, grating syllable beneath the roar of the waves. In Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, aid workers documented cases of stone dreams, where survivors compulsively scratched the same jagged symbol in the dirt, a symbol later identified as a variant of Otherland in ancient Minoan script. The pattern is clear. This isn't just superstition, it's a recurring wound in history, because while civilizations rise and fall, the Earth's memory is long. And some words aren't forgotten, they're absorbed, waiting for the right voice to call them forth again. Otherland doesn't just whisper to the Earth, it unleashes it. Across cultures, the word's echoes coincide with some of history's most devastating calamities. Events so brutal they were etched into memory as divine punishment. Take the collapse of the Minoan civilization around 1600 B.C.E. While modern scholars blame volcanic eruptions, ancient scrolls from Crete tell a different story. Fragments recovered from the ruins of Knossos describe a priest-king who dared to speak Otherland during a ritual to steady the ground. Within days, the island was rocked by quakes so violent they split palace walls like kindling. But the real horror came after. A clay tablet preserved in volcanic ash bears a frantic final message. The sea has turned to fire and the sky rains stone. The word was not for us. That same eruption Thur's cataclysm triggered tsunamis that ravaged the Mediterranean, drowning cities as far as Egypt. Coincidence? Maybe, but the Minoans weren't the only ones who linked Otherland to disaster. In India, the Vedas speak of a curse called Ashtavakra, a twisted word that could make the mountains dance. Scholars long dismissed it as metaphor until 2019, when a team deciphering Harappan script found a seal depicting a figure with 8 bends, literally, Ashtavakra standing atop a shattered city. The accompanying glyphs match linguistic reconstructions of Otherland, and the seal's base bears a warning. When the earth's bones shake, the word walks among us. Even the Mahabharata hints at this connection. One passage describes a sage uttering a forbidden syllable to punish a tyrant, only for the earth to split, swallowing the tyrant's capital whole. Survivors claimed the fissure emitted a sound like stone grinding against the sky, a detail eerily similar to modern reports from earthquake zones where Otherland has been invoked. But the word's reach extends beyond quakes. The Aztec Codex Rios tells of Tlaloc's wrath, a flood so vast it drowned an entire age of humanity. Buried in its illustrations is a curious detail. The rain god's mouth is twisted in a specific glyph, one that matches Otherland's phonetic structure. The text claims the flood began when a sorcerer princess shouted a name that cracks the sky to defy the gods. Spanish missionaries later documented oral traditions from survivors who whispered of a word that pulled the clouds down like a net. Even now, elders in remote Mexican villages avoid certain syllables during storms, fearing they might call the old water back. Perhaps most chilling are the prophecies. The Sibylline books, Rome's most sacred oracles, contained an entire chapter warning of the word that untethers the earth. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 C.E., survivors swore the quakes that preceded it had rhythm, almost like speech. A graffiti-scarred wall in Pompeii's ruins bears a single scratched line, "Heard it." Too late, similar warnings appear in Norse Galdrabókar, where Utherlan is called Jörð's scream, a sound so potent it could unstitch the roots of Yggdrasil. One Icelandic manuscript describes a vision of Ragnarök triggered not by gods or monsters, but by a mortal king who dug too deep for words. When archaeologists excavated his supposed hall in 2014, they found the floor littered with rune stones, all bearing the same plea: silence the stone. Modern geology only deepens the mystery. In 2017, researchers studying harmonic tremors beneath Yellowstone discovered a frequency pattern matching no known natural phenomenon. When played at 1/10th speed, the waveform produced a guttural vocalization, one a linguist identified as bearing striking similarities to Utherlan's reconstructed pronunciation. The team's report was buried in bureaucratic red tape, but one scientist anonymously posted online, "We didn't find it, it found us. From sinking cities to burning skies, the pattern is undeniable." Utherlan isn't just a word, it's a catalyst, and the terrifying truth: every major disaster leaves behind whispers of its echo. Whether carved into ruins or hummed by the earth itself, the warning remains: some forces should never be named. Because once they answer, they rarely stop. Survivors who have encountered Utherlan don't just remember the disaster, they remember the voice that came before it. Take the account of Elias Stavros, a fisherman who survived the Santorini earthquake of 1956. He described standing on the shore moments before the quake hit, hearing what he thought was the groan of shifting bedrock until the sound resolved into a syllable, like a tongue dragging across broken teeth. The water retreated, and in that unnatural silence he swore the cliffs whispered back the same word. When the wave came, it wasn't the force of the water that haunted him, it was the way his own shadow, cast by the moon, mouthed the sound as he ran. Then there's the testimony from the El Aquila earthquake in 2009, where survivors reported a phenomenon seismologists still can't explain. In the hours before the quake, residents described a low-frequency vibration, not the usual creaking of buildings, but a rhythmic pulse, like a hammer striking stone from deep underground. One woman, trapped in rubble, claimed the sound clarified as she lost consciousness. It wasn't just noise, it was speaking, and the aftershocks, they were its echoes. Rescue teams later found her apartment building's basement walls covered in hairline fractures that formed spiral patterns, matching archaic Greek warnings about the Earth's tongue. But the most disturbing accounts come from places where Utherlan wasn't just heard, it was answered. In 2018, after the eruption of Guatemala's Volcán de Fuego, drone footage revealed a fissure on the volcano's flank. Thermal imaging showed heat patterns that, when converted to audio frequencies, produced a guttural utterance matching linguistic reconstructions of Utherlan. Survivors in nearby villages told reporters of dreams in the weeks before the eruption, visions of a man with skin like cooled lava who pressed his lips to the ground and breathed the word into the earth. One child's drawing, recovered from the ash, depicted the volcano with a mouth full of teeth, exhaling a jagged symbol later identified as a Mayan variant of Utherlan. The eeriest pattern, survivors often describe the word infecting their senses long after the event. A firefighter who worked the ruins of the 2011 Christchurch earthquake developed a condition doctors called geophonic hallucinations, hearing the quake's vibrations as speech every time he touched concrete. Neurologists found no physical cause, but an anthropologist recognized the symptoms from medieval texts. Those who hear the Earth's voice become its conduit. Then there are the accounts that defy physics entirely. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, a Sri Lankan survivor swore the receding ocean left behind wet glyphs in the sand, glyphs that evaporated within minutes but lingered in photographs. When linguists analyzed the images, the shapes bore an uncanny resemblance to Phoenician script spelling Utherlan. Even more unsettling, the glyphs only appeared in areas where the wave's death toll was highest, as if the word had marked its prey. These stories share a thread darker than coincidence. Whether whispered by shadows, hummed by the earth, or etched by disaster itself, Othalan isn't just a trigger, it's a participant. And if the survivors are to be believed, it doesn't just cause catastrophes, it remembers those who hear it. The fourth forbidden word slithers through the darkest corners of both Hindu temples and Mesoamerican tombs, Vritrahan, a syllable that doesn't just speak to the dead but rearranges them. In the Atharva Veda, it's named as the breath stealer, a sound so potent it could reverse the flow of life itself. Ancient hymns describe ascetics chanting it over funeral pyres, only for the flames to freeze mid-flicker and the corpse's eyelids to flutter. But the texts warn this wasn't true resurrection. The returned were hollow, their veins filled with a substance the Vedas call black nectar, their voices echoing with a chorus not their own. One passage recounts a king who ordered his priests to revive his fallen queen. They obeyed, whispering Vritrahan into her ear. She awoke, but refused to blink, her pupils reflecting not the living world, but a forest of inverted skeletons. By dawn, every mirror in the palace had cracked, and the queen's hands had turned cold as monsoon rain. Half a world away, the Aztecs knew a similar horror. Their codices speak of Miquistli, the death word, a sound only uttered during the festival of Mikelhuatantli, when the veil between worlds thinned. Priests would carve it into the flesh of sacrificial victims before their hearts were removed, believing it would guide their souls to Mictlan. But one surviving Tonalamatl divinatory book tells of a ritual gone wrong. A priest, seeking to honor his slain brother, painted Miquistli on the man's lips with obsidian dust. The corpse sat up, but its skin began peeling away in papery strips, revealing muscle that pulsed with a rhythm not of this world. The codex's final illustration shows the priest's fate, his skeleton standing upright inside an intact shadow, the shadow's fingers buried in the earth like roots. Modern archaeology suggests these weren't just stories. In 2015, researchers excavating a Harappan burial site in India uncovered a skeleton with a copper amulet clutched in its ribs. Infrared scans revealed the amulet bore Vritrahan in Indus script, and soil analysis showed the skeleton had been buried twice, once with intact bones and again centuries later with the bones deliberately shattered. A nearby clay tablet explained why. The word called it back, but the flesh remembered the rot. Even now, echoes of Vritrahan persist. In 2019, a forensic team in Mexico City examined a mass grave from the 1970s. One victim's skull had Miquistli etched into the parietal bone with surgical precision. When anthropologists tried to photograph the inscription, every lens fogged inexplicably, and the bone itself emitted a faint odor of copal incense, though it had been buried for decades. The team's lead investigator quit after dreaming of a city built from stacked femurs, where the dead walked in perfect silence, their mouths sewn shut with threads of obsidian. The terrifying truth: Vritrahan doesn't resurrect, it replaces. Whether whispered over a funeral pyre or carved into bone, the word doesn't return what was lost. It simply drapes something else in the corpse's skin, and whatever steps into that empty vessel, it's been waiting a long, long time for an invitation. The rituals surrounding Vritrahan weren't just ceremonies, they were desperate bargains with the silence beyond death. In the shadowed crypts of Varanasi, ascetics known as Aghoris still whisper of a practice called Pratavidya, the science of ghosts. Ancient texts describe how sorcerers would chant Vritrahan over a corpse's left ear, the side believed to face the underworld, while burning a mixture of human ash and midnight blue lotus. The goal: to force the dead to speak, but the Garuda Purana warns that these voices weren't the departed's true souls. They were butas, fragments of lingering hunger that wore memories like masks. One passage recounts a grieving widow who paid an aghori to summon her husband. The ritual worked, but when the corpse spoke, its tongue split into 3 strands, each whispering a different name for her unborn child. By dawn, her hair had turned white, and every mirror in her home reflected a figure standing behind her, one with no face, just a mouthful of blackened teeth. The Aztecs faced similar horrors. During the Nemontemi, the 5 hollow days at the year's end, priests would gather in teas ompantly, the skull racks, and paint miquistly onto the teeth of severed heads. Codices claim the jaws would chatter, revealing prophecies, but the Florentine Codex tells of a priest who pressed his ear too close. The skull bit down, locking onto his earlobe, and for 3 nights he dreamed of a river where the dead floated upside down, their eyes reflecting a city built from the bones of those who'd heard the word. When he awoke, his left ear had withered like dried fruit, yet he claimed to hear the future in its whispers. In Tibet, the Bardo Thirdal, the Book of the Dead, forbids chanting Vritrahan near fresh corpses, lest it disrupt the soul's journey. But some Ngagpa's tantric sorcerers ignored this warning. Manuscripts from secluded monasteries describe a ritual where the word was written in vermilion on a corpse's chest, then sealed with a vulture's feather dipped in mercury. The body would sit upright, its lips moving soundlessly for exactly 49 minutes, the length of a soul's bardo passage. One account tells of an Ngagpa who performed this rite to question a murdered merchant. The corpse answered, but so did every reflection in the room. The Ngagpa's own shadow clamped a hand over his mouth, and when monks found him at dawn, his tongue had been ripped out, though the door had been locked from the inside. Modern practitioners still grapple with these consequences. In 2017, a Vietnamese spirit medium live-streamed a ritual to contact her ancestors using a reconstructed version of Vritrahan. Viewers reported their screens flickering to static at the exact moment she uttered the word, but when the feed restored, her reflection in the ancestral altar's glass didn't move with her. 3 days later, she vanished, leaving behind a voice recorder with a single looping phrase, "They're not ours anymore." The common thread, Vritrahan doesn't bridge the gap between life and death, it widens it. Whether carved into bone or whispered to shadows, the word doesn't summon spirits. It rips holes in the veil, and what crawls through wears the dead like ill-fitting skins. Because in the silence after the last breath, something else is always listening, and it's learned to mimic the voices we long to hear. Archaeologists have uncovered burial sites across the world where Vritrahan was etched into the stone or whispered into the dirt, places where the dead refused to rest. In 2012, a dig in Rajasthan revealed a 2,000-year-old tomb sealed with a slab bearing the word in Brahmi script. The moment researchers lifted the slab, their equipment failed. Flashlights dimmed, cameras shut off, and thermometers plunged to unreadable lows. Locals refused to enter the site after sundown, claiming shadows pooled unnaturally around the tomb's entrance, like ink poured over invisible hands. The team pressed on, only to find the skeleton inside positioned upright, its fingers clutching a clay tablet that read, "Do not wake the sleeper twice." That night, one archaeologist awoke to a figure standing at the foot of his cot, a silhouette with the skeleton's exact proportions, but its jaw unhinged, whispering a sound that left his ears bleeding. The tomb was resealed by dawn. Halfway across the globe, in the catacombs beneath Rome, a similar horror lurks. In 2018, restorers cleaning a forgotten Christian burial site found Vritrahan scratched into the back of a martyr's skull. The Latin inscription above it warned, "He who speaks here stays here." Security footage from that night shows a mist coiling from the skull's eye sockets, forming shapes that matched medieval descriptions of the breath stealers, souls trapped between death and damnation. One worker, despite never entering the chamber, developed blisters on his tongue in the pattern of the word. Vatican archivists later uncovered a sealed parchment linking the site to a 6th century exorcism, where a possessed nun had screamed Vritrahan in a voice not her own. The exorcist's note, "The word is the key, but the door opens both ways." Even modern graves aren't immune. In 2020, a family mausoleum in New Orleans was vandalized with Vritrahan spray painted across its doors. Within days, neighbors reported hearing whispers through the walls, though no living person was inside. A paranormal investigator who recorded the phenomena captured something worse. a voice reciting the names of every family member buried there, followed by a laugh that couldn't have come from human lungs. The audio file corrupted every device it touched, leaving behind a single loop, the sound of dirt shifting, as if something underground was digging upward. But perhaps the most chilling discovery comes from a mass grave in Poland, where victims of the Black Death were buried with stones in their mouths to prevent resurrection. In 2016, a team excavating the site found one skeleton without a stone, its jaws pried open as if mid-scream, its teeth filed into points. Carved into its ribs was Vitrahan, but in a dialect older than the plague itself. Infrared photos revealed heat signatures around the skeleton long after sunset, and one researcher's journal entry reads, "It's learning our names. Last night it said mine." The grave was reburied without ceremony, but locals still avoid the area after dark. They say the earth there sometimes pulses like a throat swallowing. These sites share a nightmare. Vitrahan doesn't just mark the dead, it mobilizes them. Whether carved into ancient tombs or scrawled on modern graves, the word twists burial grounds into way stations for things that shouldn't walk. Because while cultures across time have feared restless spirits, this is different. These aren't ghosts, they're something older, wearing death as camouflage. And wherever Vitrahan is spoken, the ground remembers. The fifth forbidden word slithers through the whispers of Polynesian navigators and the drumbeats of West African griots, Mauuliza, a sound so entwined with creation itself that speaking it aloud risks unraveling the threads of time. In the oral traditions of the Fon people, Mauuliza is the name of the dual god of moon and sun, but also a key to the veil between the worlds. Elders warn that uttering it without the proper rites doesn't just bend reality, it folds it, stitching together moments that should never touch. One legend from Benin tells of a village that chanted Mauuliza during a drought to summon rain. The skies answered, but so did something else. Survivors described watching the downpour freeze midair, droplets hanging like beads on a necklace, while the village's reflection in the water below began moving independently. By dawn, every inhabitant had vanished, leaving behind half-eaten meals still warm, and footprints that led in circles until they didn't. The ground itself bore cracks forming spiral patterns, a signature later found near other sites linked to the word. Polynesian navigators knew a similar terror. On the remote atoll of Nanmadol, stone hymns recount how a priest-king used Mauuliza to step outside time and bargain for his people's survival. He returned with fish that fed the island for a year, but his shadow no longer matched his movements. Within months, every child born on the atoll had eyes that reflected not the present, but fragmented glimpses of past and future. The islanders sealed the word inside a basalt vault, sinking it into the lagoon. Divers in the 1980s reported finding the vault empty, its interior walls scratched with star charts no human could have drawn, maps of constellations that won't exist for millennia. Modern encounters suggest Mauuliza never truly faded. In 2014, a research team studying oral histories in Togo recorded a griot singing a dirge containing a near-perfect phonetic match to the word. The recording later played back with 7 extra minutes of audio. No one remembered hearing a chorus of voices chanting in reverse. When linguists analyzed it, the syllables rearranged themselves into a sentence in a dialect extinct for centuries. You called. We are already here. Then there's the infamous Hawaiian tape from 1973. A documentary crew filming near Mauna Kea captured a kahuna whispering what scholars later identified as Mauuliza during a ceremonial chant. Reviewing the footage, they noticed a discontinuity. The kahuna's shadow flickered independently for 13 frames, bending toward a patch of empty air that, when enhanced, revealed a faint silhouette, one that matched descriptions of the time walkers from Polynesian lore. The crew's sound engineer quit after discovering his equipment had recorded an extra track labeled Voices in a handwriting none of them recognized. The track contained only static until played at half speed, when it resolved into a child's voice counting backward from infinity. The terrifying truth, Mawu Lisa doesn't just warp time, it infects it. In 2021, a physicist studying nonlinear chronodynamics in Lagos proposed that certain phonetic patterns could theoretically knot temporal threads. His paper was retracted after colleagues replicated his experiments and reported anomalies. Lab clocks ran backward during tests, and one assistant's reflection in a monitor briefly aged 50 years in real time. The physicist's final email read, "It's not a word, it's a puncture. From vanishing villages to sentient shadows, the pattern is clear. Some phrases don't just describe reality, they reshape it." And when the fabric of time itself bears the scars of a sound, perhaps forgetting isn't carelessness, it's survival. The stories surrounding Mawu Lisa aren't just legends, they're warnings etched into the fabric of time itself. Across cultures, those who have encountered the word describe eerily similar phenomena, moments where the past, present, and future collapse into a single, suffocating now. Take the tale of a Tahitian fisherman who, after hearing the word chanted during a storm, swore the waves around his canoe froze mid-crash, not like ice but like a paused breath. For 3 days, he drifted in a sea where the moon didn't move, and the fish he caught had eyes reflecting faces he didn't recognize. When he finally washed ashore, his village was gone, replaced by a crumbling ruin overgrown with vines and a single intact carving of his own face, dated 2 centuries older than his birth. In West Africa, the Dogon people speak of Mawu Lisa as the sound that unties knots. Their oral histories tell of a shaman who used it to heal a child by reweaving the boy's timeline, only for the child to wake with memories of lives he'd never lived, describing cities that wouldn't be built for generations. The shaman's fate: he vanished into a dust whirlwind, his last words echoing backward as his body unraveled like a snapped thread. Modern paranormal research offers chilling parallels. In 2016, a team studying chronocoustics, how sound affects time perception, played a reconstructed Mawu Lisa in a controlled lab environment. The result: every clock in the room stopped simultaneously, and one researcher's Fitbit logged a heart rate from the previous day. But the real horror came later. Security footage showed the team conducting the experiment an hour before they'd even entered the building. The lead scientist's notes, scribbled in haste, read, "It's not bending time, it's erasing the seams." Then there's the infamous Bermuda Echo phenomenon. Since the 1950s, pilots flying near the triangle have reported radio transmissions repeating verbatim, not as static but in their own voices seconds before they speak. Linguists analyzing these recordings identified phonetic patterns matching Mawu Lisa's structure. One cockpit recording from 1972 captures a pilot screaming, "Turn it off," before his voice loops back to calmly requesting landing clearance, a request he hadn't made yet. The most unsettling accounts come from those who have survived Mawu Lisa's touch. In 2019, a watchmaker in Zurich repairing an antique chronometer found the letters ML engraved inside its gears. That night, every clock in his shop struck 13, and his reflection in the display case blinked a second too late. He dismantled the chronometer only to discover its mechanism was flawless. It wasn't broken, it was counting something else. From frozen waves to echoing futures, these aren't just ghost stories. They are fractures in reality itself, because while most of us experience time as a river flowing in one direction, Mawu Lisa suggests something far more terrifying. Time isn't a current. It's a web, and somewhere in its threads something has learned to pull. The chants that carry Mawu Lisa aren't just melodies, they're living wires strung across time, humming with a power so volatile that entire cultures have buried them in silence. Among the Fon people of Benin, elders still guard the Zangbito night watchman's rituals, where certain verses are sung only with the mouth covered by cloth. One such chant, recorded by ethnographers in the 1960s, contains a near-perfect phonetic echo of Mawu Lisa. The moment the researchers transcribed it, their guide snatched the notebook and burned it, whispering that the ink itself could trap the unwary in yesterday's breath. Later, the team's audio recordings revealed a distortion. Every time the chant reached that syllable, the tape warped, as if the sound had physically stretched the magnetic strip. In Polynesia, the hula kahiko ancient hula holds even darker secrets. A manuscript hidden in Honolulu's Bishop Museum describes a ceremonial dance meant to fold the horizon. The accompanying chant, when analyzed by linguists, contained Mawulisa woven into its refrain, but the text warns that performing it without the proper kaiwai ceremonial space would cause the dancers to step out of their own shadows. In 1984, a group of students attempted a reconstruction based on fragmented notes. Witnesses reported seeing the dancers' movements lag half a beat behind their own bodies, like a film reel skipping. By the chant's end, one performer was found unconscious, her wrists bearing faint imprints of hands too large to be human. The event was never officially documented, but the students' handwritten journals surfaced decades later in a thrift store, one entry reading, "The chant isn't a song. It's a door, and last night we oiled the hinges." Even in modern times, the fear persists. In 2012, a team documenting Ainu oral traditions in Hokkaido encountered an elder who refused to sing a particular Upopo work chant. When pressed, he explained that its second verse had once been used to call the ancestors forward, until a village in the 1800s sang it during a famine. The next morning, every tree in the valley bore fruit out of season, but the villagers found strangers sitting at their hearths wearing their dead relatives' faces. The chant was banned, its lyrics buried with the elder's grandfather, whose grave was lined with salt and iron nails. Perhaps most chilling are the artifacts left behind. In the Amazon, the Yogwa people keep silent flutes, instruments carved with Mawulisa's symbol but never played. Anthropologists who examined them noted the finger holes don't align with any known scale. When a researcher in 1992 attempted to play one, the sound produced didn't match the finger placement. His notes describe it as a melody turned inside out, followed by 3 days of debilitating déjà vu. The flute vanished from storage, reappearing years later in a shaman's hut, its mouthpiece stained with a substance that tested positive for oxidized blood centuries older than the instrument itself. These aren't just superstitions, they're survival strategies. From Benin to Hokkaido, the pattern is the same. Cultures that encountered Mawulisa didn't just forget it, they ritually amputated it from their oral traditions. Because some words don't fade with disuse, they wait, coiled in silence, for the next voice reckless enough to give them shape. The sixth forbidden word slithers through the whispers of Slavic midnight rituals and the ink of Japanese demon-quelling scrolls Kresnik. Unlike the other words which awaken or summon, Kresnik is a paradox, a word meant to banish demons, yet one that becomes a demon if spoken incorrectly. The Slavic Volkovi sorcerers wrote of it in birch bark codes, warning that its syllables could seal a shadow to the wall, but only if the speaker's breath never faltered. One transcript from 12th century Novgorod describes a healer who chanted Kresnik to drive a nav, a vengeful spirit, from a child. The ritual worked until the final syllable, when the healer's voice cracked. The nav didn't leave, it multiplied, its form splitting into 12 identical shadows that mimicked the child's movements until the first snowfall, when they hardened into ice sculptures that wept black tears. In Japan, Kresnik appears disguised as Kotodama no Kiri, the word cut of the spirit, a cursed phrase hidden within Ofuda talismans used by Yamabushi mountain monks. A 17th century scroll from Mount Osor details an exorcism where a monk wrote Kresnik on a possessed woman's palm in cinnabar ink. The demon fled, but the ink crawled up the monk's arm, forming characters that translated to "You have given me a better vessel." By dawn, the monk's shadow had developed a second mouth, which recited Buddhist sutras in reverse until he drowned himself in a blessed waterfall. modern encounters follow the same grim pattern. In 2016, a Polish linguist reconstructing Proto-Slavic incantations accidentally transcribed Kresnik during a lecture. Students later reported seeing a man made of eraser marks standing at the back of the hall, his outline smudging whoever he touched. The linguist vanished 3 days later, but his audio notes contained an extra minute of whispering, a voice repeating, "I fixed the spelling mistake in Old Church Slavonic." Then there's the infamous Shinjuku Station incident of 2019. A homeless man in Tokyo allegedly scrawled Kresnik on a subway wall in his own blood. Security footage showed commuters avoiding the area, though the wall appeared blank. That night, cleaners found the tiles coated in a substance that evaporated by morning, leaving behind hair-thin cracks that formed the word again and again, no matter how often they were repaired. The terrifying truth: Kresnik doesn't just banish shadows, it bargains with them. A Belarusian folktale warns that speaking it aloud is like throwing a leash to a wolf. You might hold on, but the wolf learns, and the next time it might just pull back. The rituals to contain Kresnik weren't just prayers, they were desperate battles waged in ink and blood. The Slavic Volkovi sorcerers left behind birch bark scrolls detailing ceremonies so precise, a single misstep could turn the exorcist into the possessed. One such text, discovered in the ruins of a 10th century monastery, describes a ritual where the word had to be written in a circle of crushed oak gall and wolf's blood, with the sorcerer's shadow pinned beneath a silver nail. The moment Kresnik was spoken, the shadow would thrash like a hooked fish, but if the nail held, the demon would be trapped in its outline. A later marginal note warns of a novice who blinked during the incantation. His shadow detached completely, standing upright while his body collapsed. The last line, scrawled in a shaking hand, reads, "It wears him better now." Japanese Yamabushi monks took even more extreme measures. Their Goma fire rituals involved inscribing Kresnik onto wooden tablets, then burning them in a sacred flame while chanting backward sutras. A 16th century manual from Kyoto details how the smoke would twist into the shape of the trapped spirit, but cautions that the wind must never change direction during the rite. One account tells of a monk who ignored this warning. The smoke coiled around his throat instead of rising, and when the ashes settled, his voice was gone. His companions found him days later in the temple bell tower, whispering perfect echoes of their unspoken thoughts. The Aztecs had their own version of this horror. The Codex Magliebkiano depicts priests performing a Nahual exorcism, where Kresnik was carved into a jade knife used to cut the demon from the victim's flesh. But the illustrations show a grotesque detail. The knife's reflection in the victim's eyes never matches its real movements. A footnote explains why. The word lives in the mirror. It watches. Even medieval Europe grappled with Kresnik's duality. A German grimoire from the Black Forest describes a rite where the word was sewn into a puppet made of the possessed person's hair. The doll would then be submerged in holy water, dissolving the curse, but the text warns that the water must never be poured out afterward. One priest recorded what happened when this rule was broken. The liquid refused to leave the basin, forming a perfect sphere that rolled uphill toward the church. By midnight, every crucifix in the village had inverted. Modern exorcists still encounter these echoes. In 2018, a Romanian Orthodox priest performing a house blessing found Kresnik scratched into the floorboards beneath a child's bed. When he attempted to sanctify the room, his censer chain snapped, scattering burning coals that left no burns but spelled the word in ash. The family moved, but the new renters reported an unnerving phenomenon. Their reflections would sometimes mouth words a second before they spoke them. The chilling pattern across these texts: Kresnik doesn't just banish demons, it negotiates with them. Whether trapped in smoke, bound by silver, or dissolved in holy water, the word leaves behind a residue. Because the darkest truth of exorcism isn't that demons can be expelled, it's that they remember the taste of the light. The whispers of Kresnik cling to certain places like smoke to charred wood, staining the air with a presence that refuses to fade. Take the abandoned Poveglia Island near Venice, where asylum patients in the 1800s reportedly scratched the word into the walls of their cells. Visitors today describe a chilling phenomenon, their shadows detaching from their bodies the moment they step into the ruined hospital, mimicking movements they haven't made yet. One paranormal investigator's journal from 2014 details how his team's thermal camera captured a figure standing behind them, one with no heat signature, just an outline that matched their own shadows exactly. By morning, every reflective surface in their equipment had fogged over, etching Kresnik in condensation. Then there's Japan's Aokigahara forest, where a 19th century monk supposedly carved the word into a tree before vanishing. Hikers who have strayed off the trails report hearing whispers that sync perfectly with their own breathing, as if something is rehearsing their voice. In 2017, a search and rescue team found a series of broken mirrors nailed to trees, each shard bearing a single character of Kresnik in what forensics confirmed was human saliva. The team leader later described nightmares of a faceless scribe writing the word on his skin with a rusted nail, waking to find his arms covered in faint, bloodless scratches. But perhaps the most notorious site is Bulgaria's Belogradchik fortress, where Ottoman prisoners were said to have chanted Kresnik to curse their captors. Locals still avoid the dungeons after dark, claiming the stones sometimes whisper back. In 2019, a film crew documenting the fortress's history captured audio of a voice reciting the word, in the exact cadence of their director, though his lips never moved. The recording later played on a loop in their editing suite despite being deleted, the volume increasing each night until their hard drives melted into black sludge. What ties these places together isn't just tragedy, it's residue. Like ink bleeding through parchment, Kresnik lingers where it's spoken, warping the rules of reflection and sound. Because this word doesn't just banish demons, it leaves behind an echo, one that learns, adapts, and waits for the next voice reckless enough to give it shape. The seventh forbidden word doesn't whisper, it unmakes, carved into the rocks of forgotten Tibetan monasteries and woven into the chants of Navajo night chanters. Yagara is the sound that unravels the boundary between our world and what came before. Unlike the other words which summon or twist, Yagara doesn't call forth gods or demons, it awakens the architecture of creation itself. The Tibetan burn texts describe it as the first syllable, the vibration that birthed existence from the void. But their warning is clear, speaking it now isn't creation, it's collision. High in the Himalayas, monks still guard cave temples where Yagara is painted in mineral pigments that fade if exposed to moonlight. One crumbling manuscript tells of a lama who chanted it to heal a dying village. The crops regrew overnight, but so did the villagers' shadows, elongating into shapes that matched prehistoric cave paintings. By the next moon cycle, every reflection in the valley's streams showed not the present, but a time before humans walked the earth. The lama sealed himself in a meditation cell, his final words. The word remembers the shape of its mouth. The Navajo tell a parallel horror. Their Dine Bhane adjective creation stories speak of a taboo phrase used by the Yayai spirits to weave the world. In the 1930s, an anthropologist recorded a healing chant that contained a near match to Yagara. The medicine man who sang it vanished that night, leaving behind a hogan filled with sand that shouldn't exist in the desert, granules too smooth, too round, like stones worn by an ancient sea. Years later, a shepherd stumbled upon the man's body perfectly preserved in a dry crevice, his lips sewn shut with turquoise beads. Modern encounters are rarer but no less chilling. In 2012, a physicist studying cosmic microwave background radiation at a Tibetan observatory detected an anomaly, a repeating waveform that, when converted to audio, produced a guttural vocalization matching Yagara. The team's leader quit after dreaming of a city built from equations, where the streets folded into themselves like a snake eating its tail. His final journal entry read, "The universe hums it. We just forgot how to listen." Then there's the infamous Skinwalker recording. In 2019, a ranch hand in Utah filmed a strange light formation over Skinwalker Ranch. The video's audio, initially dismissed as static, was later found to contain a phonetic cousin of Yagara, spoken not by a human, but by something mimicking the ranch's own security system. The next morning, every camera on the property had reset to factory settings, their date stamps reading "Error, time not found," the terrifying truth. Yagara isn't just a word, it's a frequency, a sound so fundamental that speaking it doesn't disturb the universe, it reminds the universe of what it used to be. And in that remembering, something older than God stirs, something that never agreed to sleep. The prophecies surrounding Yagara don't just warn of destruction, they describe an unmaking so absolute it rewrites the past. Tibetan Terma texts hidden in mountain caves speak of the Great Dissolution, a time when the word will be spoken not by human tongues but by the wind itself. When that happens, the texts claim, the boundaries between worlds will thin like ice underfoot, and the old ones who built the stars will wake from their slumber in the spaces between atoms. One scroll, sealed inside a bumper vase for 9 centuries, paints a chilling scene. Rivers flowing backward, mountains folding like paper, and every reflection showing not the present, but a time before time, a primordial darkness where Yagara was the only sound. The final line, written in ink mixed with the scribe's own blood, reads, "The word is the key, the void is the lock." Navajo elders tell a parallel prophecy. During the Hajawaji night chants, initiates learn of a day when Yagara will be woven wrong into the fabric of existence. When that happens, the Yayai spirits will unravel their creation, pulling the threads of reality back into the cosmic loom. A sand painting from the 1920s, hidden from outsiders, depicts this moment, a black hole shaped like a mouth, swallowing not just the earth but the memory of it, as if we never existed at all. The accompanying chant warns, when the word finds its first breath again, the world will forget its name. Even modern science brushes against this horror. In 2021, astronomers at the Event Horizon Telescope detected an anomaly near Sagittarius A, the supermassive black hole at our galaxy's center. The radio waves, when converted to audio, produced a Chinese letter pulse matching Yagara's phonetic structure. One researcher's private notes, later leaked, speculated, what if black holes aren't just swallowing matter? What if they're whispering? The team disbanded shortly after, but not before one member vanished during an observation shift. His last email, timed minutes before his disappearance, contained a single attachment, an audio file of his own voice, slowed to 1% of its normal speed, reciting Yagara backward. Then there's the Antarctica incident of 2018. A team drilling into Lake Vostok's subglacial waters hit a pocket of ancient air, and their equipment recorded a sound matching Yagara at a frequency that shouldn't exist in nature. Within hours, every drill bit had shattered, their fractures forming spiral patterns identical to petroglyphs found in Tibetan caves. The team's psychologist, who'd monitored their mental health, later confessed in her journal, they kept dreaming of a city under the ice, built by something that knew the shape of words before language existed. These aren't just stories, they're echoes of a truth buried so deep, even myth only grazes it, because Yagara isn't just a sound, it's the blueprint of existence. And if the prophecies are right, speaking it now wouldn't end the world. It would remind the universe how to unmake itself. Even today, whispers of Yagara slip through the cracks of the modern world, guarded, suppressed, and hunted in equal measure. Secret societies like the Himalayan Nyingma monks still practice terma, the art of hiding sacred knowledge, burying fragments of the word in coded meditation, chants, or carving them into prayer wheels that never turn. One initiate's memoir, smuggled out of Nepal in the 1990s, describes a cave temple where Yagara is painted in mercury, infused ink on a ceiling too high to read because the monks know some syllables weren't meant to be seen, only felt, vibrating through the stones like a heartbeat. Meanwhile, in the deserts of the American Southwest, certain Navajo Hatolai healers allegedly preserve Yagara within the malevolent verses of their night chants, phrases sung backward or at frequencies too low for human ears. A medicine man interviewed in 2008 under strict anonymity claimed the word is woven into the silence between notes, a safeguard against misuse. He described a ritual where sand paintings of Yagara are deliberately scuffed before completion because the earth remembers shapes too well. Governments, too, have shown eerie interest. Declassified CIA documents from the Cold War reference Project Stargate's attempts to weaponize ancient vibrational codes, with one memo redacting a phonetic sequence later identified by linguists as a near match to Yagara. The experiment was abruptly shelved after a remote viewer reported a vision of a black star singing, followed by a week-long migraine that left permanent gaps in his memory. Conspiracy theories spiral deeper. Some claim the Large Hadron Collider's unexplained energy spikes in 2012 coincided with a leaked recording of Tibetan monks chanting Yagara near Geneva. Others point to the infamous WOW signal, a 72-second radio burst from deep space in 1977 that, when slowed down, mirrors the word's tonal structure. Astronomers dismissed it as natural phenomena, but a deleted forum post from a former SETI technician reads, "It wasn't calling us, it was correcting us." The most chilling modern accounts come from whistleblowers. A former defense contractor in 2020 alleged that DRP funded research into Yagara as a resonance weapon, abandoning the project after test subjects began experiencing chronological displacement, memories of events that hadn't happened yet, or worse, memories that overwrote others. His dossier included a photo of a lab wall scarred by fractal cracks captioned, "It didn't break the room, it unknitted the angles." From monk-guarded caves to black-budget labs, the pattern is clear. Yagara isn't just feared, it's contained. Because in a world where science brushes against the primordial, some words aren't forbidden for their danger, they're forbidden for their precision. A single syllable spoken correctly might not destroy the world. It might just remind the universe how to fold itself into something older, and that's a door no one wants to open. Hollywood has a knack for taking ancient horrors and sanding down their edges, turning them into something just dangerous enough to thrill audiences but never truly unsettle them. Take Adaru, the Sumerian word that once split the earth. In the 2012 supernatural thriller The Possession, it's reduced to a catchy plot device scrawled on a debug box, unleashing a demon that conveniently can be defeated by slamming the lid shut. The real Adaru doesn't play by those rules. There's no third-act exorcism, no heroic last-minute save. History whispers of cities swallowed whole, of priests who vanished mid-ritual, their last words etched into walls like claw marks. The film's version, a tidy ending because the truth is messier and far more final. Video games at least flirt with the darker implications. The Elder Scrolls series features the Thumb, a shout language based on Norse and Akkadian fragments where players can unrelentingly force enemies to flee, a clear nod to Vazakaru, the threshold breaker. But even here, the stakes feel manageable. Your character might battle dragons, but they'll never wake up to find their own shadow has learned the shout better than they have, its voice spilling from every reflective surface long after the console's turned off. That's the real terror of these words. They're not just tools, they're teachers, and once spoken, they never truly leave. Literature occasionally brushes closer to the abyss. H.P. Lovecraft's The Whisperer in Darkness features a protagonist who stumbles upon a phonetic rendering of Yagara in a recording of outer-worldly music. His fate, a disembodied brain shipped to the void, screaming into the cosmic static. Lovecraft understood something filmmakers often ignore. These words aren't just syllables, they're alive. They adapt. In his mythos, even hearing Yagara risks attuning your mind to angles outside geometry. Compare that to Indiana Jones, where ancient curses are resolved with a quippy one-liner and a sprint from rolling boulders. The difference: one respects the hunger of history, the other treats it as a prop. Even pop culture's most infamous forbidden word tropes miss the mark. The Bloody Mary chant, repeated in countless horror movies, is a pale echo of Ritrahan, the death word that doesn't just summon spirits, it reconstructs them, stitching together corpses from fragments of unfinished lives. Modern renditions show a ghostly face in a mirror. The older versions, they describe the chanter's own reflection stepping out, wearing their skin like ill-fitting suits. That's the core these stories gloss over. The words aren't just keys, they're mirrors, and what looks back is never what you expect. Perhaps the most telling distortion lies in how pop culture handles consequences. In The Ring, saying Othelon's cinematic cousin accursed videotapes imagery dooms you in 7 days. Neat, predictable. Real-world accounts of Othelon describe survivors who don't just die. They fracture, their shadows lag seconds behind, their dreams replay disasters that haven't happened yet. One Icelandic fisherman who heard it during a storm swore the waves froze mid-crash, and when they thawed, his son's face in the family photo album had been replaced by a stranger's. No countdown, no rules, just a world subtly, irrevocably unmade. The trend is clear. Entertainment loves the idea of forbidden words but hates their true weight. They'll show you the summoning, but not the way Maulisa lingers in the corners of a room, making clocks tick backward for generations. They'll dramatize the ritual, but not the way Kresnik etches itself into the walls of places where it's spoken, waiting for the next voice to borrow. Because the darkest truth isn't that these words can kill you, it's that they might use you to reach the next listener and the next in a chain that stretches far beyond the credits. So the next time a movie villain chants a forbidden phrase, ask yourself, what's the real cost? Not the CGI spectacle, but the quiet, creeping horror of something ancient waking up and recognizing your voice. After all, legends don't vanish. They just wait for someone to speak them into the light again. These 7 words aren't just fragments of dead languages. They're landmines buried in the soil of history, waiting for one careless step to detonate. Adaru cracks open the earth, Vazakaru unstitches the seams between worlds, Othelon hums in the bones of mountains, a vibration that could bring them crashing down. Ritrahan puppets the dead with invisible strings, Maulisa folds time like paper, creasing moments that should never touch. Kresnik turns exorcisms into bargains with the thing behind your shadow. And Yagara, it doesn't just erase the present, it rewrites the past, reminding the universe of the void that came before. These words weren't forbidden because they were blasphemous. They were forbidden because they work. Countless civilizations have collapsed under the weight of their curiosity, leaving behind warnings scratched into temple walls and buried with the dead. The Sumerians sealed Adaru in clay cylinders guarded by tongueless priests. The Navajo wove Yagara into chants only to unravel them before completion. The Slavs drove iron nails through their own shadows to contain Kresnik. These weren't rituals, they were acts of survival. Because while empires rise and fall, these words remain, patient as glaciers, hungry as fire. Yet the most terrifying truth isn't the power these words hold, it's the fact that they're just the beginning. Hidden in the cracks of untranslated manuscripts, hummed in the lowest registers of forgotten chants, waiting in the static between radio frequencies, there are others. Words not yet named, syllables too sharp for modern tongues to shape. Maybe they're carved into the pillars of sunken cities, or whispered by figures with too many joints in the dreams of those who dig too deep. So if you ever stumble upon a symbol that makes your pulse skip, or a phrase that slips from your memory the moment you hear it, let it go. The past isn't just a graveyard. It's a prison, and some doors shouldn't be unlocked. But if you've ever felt the pull of the forbidden, if part of you wants to know what happens when language outpaces caution, tell us in the comments. And while you're there, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell because the next forbidden word, it's already listening.